Welcome, everyone. This is a educational webinar conducted by the All Hazards Consortium. On the phone with us today are Ms. Janet Clements and Michael Freed, and I wanted to introduce them, both of them to you all and provide a little bit of their background, and then we can get into this project, which is focused on the shelter-in-place training. This is part of the Regional Catastrophic Planning Grant Program being conducted by the states in FEMA Region 3. With that, Janet, why don't I have you and Mike introduce yourselves, and we can get started.
Great. It's good to be here, Tom, and I am currently the project manager for this shelter-in-place project. Formerly worked with the Virginia Department of Emergency Management as the Deputy Director of the agency, was there at that agency for 25 years, so much of my career spent in government. I worked in the National Capital Region quite a bit in that role. So for the past year and a half, I've moved over to the private side and working on this project as well as several others.
Thanks, Janet, and thanks, Tom, for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Mike Freed, and I'm part of the All Hazards Consortium Program Management Office, and I'm working with Janet on this important shelter-in-place project. My background is primarily in business continuity planning, disaster recovery planning, as well as emergency management and response.
Well, we want to talk about the project, which is focused on shelter-in-place, and probably good first to talk about what is shelter-in-place. Most people are fully aware of when something bad happens, evacuation is often a choice to protect yourself. But in many situations, shelter-in-place, which is basically taking immediate shelter where you are, whether you're at home or work or school or somewhere in between, is to the closest location, is the most important thing you can do to protect yourself. Whether it be from a terrorist-driven situation or a hazardous materials event, any kind of deadly chemicals, radiological or nuclear materials. Shelter-in-place is also good for tornado preparedness, if the tornado is heading your way, and even snowstorms when it's not safe to get out on the road. So this project is designed to kind of balance out the fact that evacuation gets so much attention, and yet often evacuation is really the worst thing you can do in a situation. So this training is designed to move people toward a more balanced protective action, a series of things that they can do to protect themselves in any emergency. Just to give you a sense of some background surveys that we've done in the National Capital Region, a recent survey that was done as part of this catastrophic grant pointed out that in the scenario we used was a dirty bomb or radiological dispersion device. In a situation like that, many people would shelter in place, but few have plans to actually know how to do that. And it's not as simple as just knowing how to get in a building and where the safest room is. It's some of the things that keep people from doing it are family issues and that kind of thing. So our process helps people think through that. And instead of what is often the traditional approach where experts from emergency and preparedness try to educate the public through sort of what we call more of an instructional top-down approach, this approach we're using is actually grassroots. We're training people at the grassroots level how to have discussions both in the workplace, schools, and other places to talk through the issues of sheltering in place. We have been working on pilots, and this project is funded through the FEMA Regional Catastrophic Preparedness Grant Program. So we do fortunately have funding, and as I'll move through the presentation, I'll talk a little bit more about how we're focused primarily at the start on the private sector. To tell you a little bit more about this private sector pilot, again, we're trying to come up with a system that helps everyone in the workplace be aware of the issues that they need to be aware of, and in regard to shelter in place, we want to stimulate their thinking about the solutions that will work in their particular environment and take action. The location of our pilot was the Golden Triangle Business Improvement District, and that's the commercial district of Washington, D.C., very close to the White House. So they have regular suspicious packages. So there's quite a bit of interest in that area on preparedness, and they've been working toward doing some preparedness exercises and that kind of thing. So that was a very ideal location. We worked with building management from Blake Real Estate and the participating tenants, and I won't list them all. They're on the slides, but one of the largest companies participating was the American Bankers Association and others that are listed there. So we had very active participation from the private sector, and they really helped us with determining where we needed to refine the process and making it viable for a full-fledged launch as we move through this grant process. Moving on to the next slide, I mentioned earlier that we're using a very different approach. Having come from government in emergency management, the traditional approach is someone that's an expert in emergency preparedness will go out to a group and talk to them, give a presentation of 45 minutes maybe on how to get ready for disasters, and then leave a little time for questions. And while that approach can certainly be valuable and produce good results, our research has pointed to the fact that often people are they're looking for opportunities to get engaged and participate. Instead of being sort of in listener mode, we wanted to get them in active participant mode. So that's exactly what this process does. So what we did was we went to the companies and we worked with them to find regular employees within their companies who had a interest in this topic, who had some skills where they felt comfortable leading a discussion, because in essence that's what they're doing. We conducted training for them, basically teaching them a little bit more about shelter in place, how to facilitate a discussion, and the whole planning process. And so what the facilitators did is they went back to their organization, scheduled meetings with their coworkers, and using a series of questions, instead of talking, they basically asked questions that led people to their own sort of solutions. So it made each person be able to personalize the situation. We started with a scenario about a dirty bomb going off and asked people a series of questions about how they would respond if they had to shelter in place. We then went to work after some of those issues were dealt with. We worked with them to assemble and have those discussions with the company leadership on then what kinds of issues would they have to determine and what kinds of issues would they have to deal with from a level, not just an individual level. And we then talked with building management, because there's some issues that have to be dealt with throughout the entire building as opposed to just strictly in the company, because we worked with one building, the Bender building. All these companies were located in that building. And there's an interesting tie to this with business continuity planning, because we found some interesting linkages. And Mike Freed is really an expert in that area, and I'd like for him to talk a little bit about what we discovered as we worked with them through this process.
Thanks, Janet. And it was definitely an interesting process as we got to sit down with both people that were part of, traditionally part of business continuity planning, as well as just the average employees, and get a lot of feedback on the shelter-in-place project. I think the most interesting thing to me was traditionally business continuity planning is focused on continuing business processes and operations. In short, that means planning and keep the business operating during an incident or emergency event. Taking that a little further, historically BCP mixes with emergency management planning, which has more so been focused on evacuation of people. We're starting to see through this project and in many of my discussions with BCP professionals in the private sector, shelter-in-place is really a growing component of emergency management planning and is starting to become integrated with business continuity planning. The key difference is that shelter-in-place is focused first on protecting the people and then the traditional business continuity of continuing those operations would then follow. So in discussing with business continuity professionals, first they usually focus on how do we get the business back up and running, whether it's manual workarounds or moving people to different locations. But shelter in place is all about protecting the people first. It's business is shut down, and what do we need to do to make sure our people are safe? But it is exciting to see that BCP professionals in the private sector are beginning to integrate shelter in place into their BCP efforts. And in fact, some companies we're seeing are even shifting their mental mindset by changing their primary default emergency response from evacuation first to shelter in place first, which is definitely something that is really interesting and exciting at the same time.
Thanks, Mike. That's a great overview of how all this connects, and your point about the mindset changing from evacuate first to now shelter in place first, I think is certainly a wise decision and one that that's part of this whole process. Moving on to the next slide and looking at our expected outcomes, we are, as I mentioned, we did the first pilot. We will do additional business offerings in the Golden Triangle to further refine the process. That will then drive additional public discussions in other businesses, in schools and communities, because what we find is, for many people, the decision of whether to stay in place or to leave is based often on their family situation. And so schools are very much part of this. And as schools prepare and communicate their capability to protect people's children with really good shelter-in-place plans, and many schools have those plans in place, the communication back to parents is a key piece that we want to further enhance. But people are much more likely to stay in place and not spread contamination to somewhere else or risk their lives if they know that their children or their loved ones are safe. So that's a big component in why schools are so important, as well as communities and households. So we want to increase that public and private sector buy-in because it's all linked. And that's sort of the beauty of this program is when you start in one place, it touches others. As we work through vendor building, some of the companies there, they were not only interested in their workplace, but they started asking questions about their children's schools. So that leads us to that as we continue to branch out to the schools and to the communities. That really shows that linkage. And we want this to supplement current government efforts through this bottom-up approach, because what our research points is that if people are engaged, they're going to listen more. We have a very distracted world, and people don't respond as well to lecture as maybe they did at one time. And so we're finding that involvement of everyone through this discussion process ensures more buy-in, and it ensures that people personalize it and design something that works for them and their family. And that's really the approach. And many people who have gone through it have found the approach to be refreshing and stimulating. And so we've gotten really great feedback on this approach, bottom-up, very engaged approach that we're using.